Good afternoon, everybody. And so I thank our abbot, the Venerable Yo Min, for organizing this little retreat. And I welcome all of you to Zhuangyan Monastery and hope that you will all benefit from this little retreat. Yeah, the topic of the retreat, the way the abbot formulated it, is metta in motion. I don't know about the motion aspect, but I'll explain the metta aspect. So what is meant by the Pali word metta, which is what we translate into English as loving kindness. And so the original word metta, it's based on another word in Pali. The word is mita or mitra in Sanskrit, which means friend. Maybe you know the expression kalyana mita, which means a good friend, a spiritual friend. And so literally, metta will be friendliness, but it seems the English word friendliness is sort of too casual or too mundane in its implications. So if somebody is just a sort of jolly good fellow who gets along easily with a lot of people, we say he has a lot of friendliness, but that is not the meaning of metta. Metta is not the ordinary feeling of friendliness, but I say that it's a quality of warmth and affection for others, which is rooted in a deep and genuine concern for their welfare and happiness. And so many of the early translators, and I follow them, use the translation loving kindness, combining these two aspects. So loving, using the word loving, emphasizes that aspect of care and concern for others. Loving concern should manifest in our actions, our attitudes, the way we relate to others. And so the Pali texts, especially the commentaries, they have like a formal definition of loving kindness or of metta as the wish for the welfare and happiness of all beings. So when we say all beings, it means not only other beings, but oneself as well. So it's the wish for the welfare and happiness of oneself and others. And we have two aspects here that are emphasized: the wish for welfare or well-being and the wish for happiness. And both aspects have to be brought in, because we don't want people simply to be happy. People can be happy in ways that are unwholesome, like somebody goes out drinking, womanizing, gambling, they win a lot of money, or they go to shows and worldly enjoyments. We say they're happy, but that is not the kind of happiness that we're wishing for people. We wish a kind of wholesome quality of happiness. And so that happiness has to be conjoined with the wish for the welfare of people, the well-being of people. And to wish for people to be well, that means that we wish for them to be free from harm and danger. So we wish for them to be free from illness, from accidents and injuries, from bodily illness, and also to be free from mental illness, from stress, anxiety, worry, distress, to be free from anger and hatred, and so forth. And so, loving kindness, we say we want people to be well, it means that we want them to be healthy in body and healthy in mind. But then we also want them to be happy, and to be happy means to be free from all distressful states of mind. That is, to be free from worry, from anxiety, from sorrow, grief, fear, and anxiety. And so loving kindness, again, is the wish for all beings, oneself and others, to be well, to be happy, to be healthy, to be happy. And then at a still deeper level, which doesn't necessarily come in to the early stages of meditation, we want people, when we practice loving kindness, we want people to develop the causes of happiness and well-being. Because this is looking at the situation of people from the standpoint of the Buddha's teaching of karma, that our actions, our volitional actions, our intentional actions have the capacity, the potential to bring about consequences or results that follow from the ethical nature of our actions. And so unwholesome actions, these are actions motivated by greed and selfishness, by hatred and anger, by conceit, craving for power, by wrong views, by delusion, those kind of unwholesome actions, even if they bring immediate power, prosperity, wealth, success, but they are creating the causes for future suffering. And so we don't want people to be enjoying happiness through unwholesome types of actions, actions motivated by these deep drives of greed, hatred, craving for power and wealth and domination. Instead, we want people to create, to generate the karmic causes for true happiness in the future. That is, we want people to engage in wholesome actions, actions motivated by we call these the wholesome roots of generosity, of kindness and compassion and wisdom. And so, when we're wishing for people to be well and happy, at one level we're wishing them to experience present well-being and happiness, but we're also wishing for them to create, to generate the causes, the karmic causes for future well-being and happiness, to engage in wholesome activities. Okay, loving kindness is closely connected to another quality which is very highly esteemed in Buddhism, and that quality is patience. But there is a difference between loving kindness and patience. So they're associated, but there's some subtle difference between them. Both of them, we could say, are the antidotes or the remedies for ill will and anger, but they operate in somewhat different ways. So I would say that patience, this is my own understanding, patience is an exercise in restraint. That is, when we feel anger starting to arise, we curb that anger. We pull it in, we restrain it, we prevent it from gaining momentum, from breaking out and expressing itself. So patience points inwardly towards our own tendencies to anger and to our own impulses to inflict harm, to act violently against those that we dislike, to retaliate against those who harm us. And so that is patience. And so patience is an extremely important quality to develop, because so often other people might speak to us in angry ways and spiteful ways, or might try to harm us. And the natural tendency is to respond to angry words by speaking angrily in turn, to return aggressive actions directed against us, to respond with aggression towards others. And so we have to curb that anger by remaining patient. And there are various techniques that the Buddhist tradition teaches to help us overcome that anger. Yeah, I'll just mention some of them, but first I want to come to the difference between patience and loving kindness. So loving kindness, I say, is more active and positive in its manifestation. And so loving kindness is the active and should be the powerful wish for the good and happiness of others. And loving kindness seeks actively to promote the well-being and happiness of others. And so loving kindness, we could say, looks outward towards others, seeking to promote their well-being and happiness. Whereas patience, we look inward towards ourselves, seeking to restrain, to curb, to control our anger and resentment, to prevent it from gaining momentum, building up, and expressing itself. Yeah, in the practice of Buddhism, there are two sides of our personality or of our character that we're trying to develop. So we could say that we're trying to develop, on the one hand, the quality emphasized so strongly by the Buddha is the development of wisdom. And wisdom means a clear, deep, and accurate understanding of the true nature of things. And as wisdom evolves and develops, it becomes insight. And insight means the direct knowledge and seeing of the way things truly are. And this means to see things within the framework of the basic templates that the Buddha lays down in his discourses, to see things by way of dependent origination, to see things in terms of conditionality, to understand how all phenomena arise through causes and conditions. And then the wisdom that looks into conditionality develops into the insight into impermanence. And this comes through the practice of mindfulness directed to examining our own bodily and mental phenomena, seeing how all of the phenomena, the constituents of body and mind, arise, stand for a moment, and pass away. And through developing this deep insight into impermanence, it undermines the deep clinging and grasping of the notions of I and mine, the view of a self, and then the attachment to the idea that there is some kind of true, lasting basis for personal identity at the center of our being. And that grasping at the notion of personal identity takes the form of grasping the notions of I and others, what is mine and what doesn't belong to me. And so through the practice of qualities like mindfulness and concentration, we aim to develop wisdom. And wisdom is the quality that brings liberation. that cuts off the bonds and fetters, the defilements, and brings the final liberation. But as the counterpart to wisdom, we also have to develop another side to our character, and this is what I would call the character of the heart. Maybe we could say wisdom is a quality of the mind, but we also have to develop certain virtues of the heart. And in the Buddhist tradition, going back to the early Buddhist texts, we have 4 interrelated virtues which make up the components of a beautiful heart, of a beautiful moral character. These 4 qualities are called Brahma-vihara, which means Vihara means the dwelling place, and Brahma was the ancient Indian divinity, the God, supreme God. So we can say that these are divine abodes, or sublime dwellings, or beautiful dwellings. And they're also called immeasurable states, because ideally we are supposed to develop them boundlessly to all sentient beings. And so what are these 4 Brahma-viharas, 4 divine abodes? The first of them is metta, or loving kindness. So loving kindness is the foundation for developing this beautiful moral character, for developing these beautiful qualities of the heart. And so loving kindness, as I said, is the wish, the strong, deep, powerful wish for the well-being and happiness of others, or of oneself and others. But then, when we look out upon the world, we see so many people and other living beings who are subjected to suffering. And so the sort of natural response when the heart is suffused with loving kindness, and then we witness the suffering of others, the natural response is for compassion to arise. And that is the second divine abode, compassion, which is said to be that quality of the shaking of the heart, the resonance of the heart with the suffering of others. And then compassion, when it becomes a habitual feature of the heart, of the mind, manifests in actions that are intended to alleviate the suffering of others. Okay, so on one side, with the mind of loving kindness, we look out at those who are suffering, and then we experience compassion. So that is the second beautiful quality of the heart. But then, sort of as a balance to compassion, because if you practice compassion all the time, you're witnessing the suffering of others, and it's a very beautiful, sublime emotion, but it has a tendency to pull the mind down because of this constant exposure to suffering. So you get a kind of burning out of the mind. So we have to balance that, a little bit like balancing flavors. If you're preparing a meal, you have to use certain spices in the right combination. And so the balance for compassion is, we have the word mudita, which is what we translate as altruistic joy or sympathetic joy. And this is rejoicing in the good fortune and success of others, and rejoicing in the virtues and good qualities of others. And so whereas compassion can tend to pull the mind down because of the witnessing the suffering of others, with altruistic joy, mudita, lifts the mind up and brings a kind of deep resonance of joy and gladness and delight when you, instead of thinking competitively, in this American society, there's always this emphasis, you have to be competitive. You have to struggle with others in the fight to get ahead. And so if you see others succeed or have good qualities, then you feel envious and a sense of rivalry, you have to outstrip them. But with mudita, with altruistic joy, instead of feeling competitive, we rejoice in the success and the good qualities of others. And that, when we rejoice, then our own mind becomes full of joy. So when others succeed, we rejoice in their success. When we see others display certain noble or worthy qualities, we rejoice in their good qualities. And in that way, we lift the mind up with happiness. So that is the third divine abode, altruistic joy. And then the fourth divine abode is called upekkha, which is translated as equanimity. And maybe there's two ways to understand equanimity here. One way is to understand it in terms of impartiality. That is, it's that quality whereby we look at all other people, even other living beings, but let's just focus on other human beings. Without making artificial discriminations or distinctions, thinking that I like these people, I dislike those people. Or maybe you have people that belong to your same ethnic group. If you're Chinese, then you have a preference for Chinese people, and you might dislike maybe Hispanic people or white people or African American people. And if you belong to one of those other groups, you have a natural tendency to prefer your group and to feel some kind of suspicion, resentment, fear, distrust of people belonging to the other ethnic groups. Or if you follow one religion, if you're a Buddhist, then you have a natural tendency to approve of what other Buddhists are doing, and you're critical of what people in other religions are doing. But with upekkha, you look at people all the same, without any discrimination or distinction. So that's one sense of upekkha, is what I call impartiality or non-discrimination. And then the other sense of upekkha is, maybe we could call it non-attachment. And that is that there are situations where one wishes to be able to make a difference, one wishes to be able to help, but sometimes one cannot make a difference, cannot really help. So there might be, for example, people you've been trying to help, to change them, to change their actions, their ways of thinking, to help them improve themselves, but all of your efforts come to nothing. The person remains stuck in their ways of acting and thinking, and then you have to realize there's nothing I can do, and then you have to be able to look on with a kind of non-attachment to the results. So you do your best to help a situation, but when you can't succeed, then you sort of draw back into this equanimity, which helps you maintain the balance, not to be attached to the results of your action. You just do your best and then accept whatever the results will be with equanimity. Okay, so those are the four qualities that constitute, that sort of work together, that are integrated, that operate together to make up the beautiful heart or the beautiful moral character. And the root of all of those four qualities, as I said, is loving kindness. And so that is why we begin developing the beauty of the heart through the development of loving kindness. And then once we have a strong foundation of loving kindness, then we can move on to develop compassion, altruistic joy, and equanimity. Okay, so now I want to raise the question, what is the purpose or benefit of developing loving kindness? And so I would say one of the benefits, or some of the benefits first, are rather selfish ones. Okay. Okay, so we say that loving kindness is the antidote to hatred and to anger. And one feature that happens if you are a habitually angry person, a person with a lot of anger, a lot of hatred, is that it even affects your physiology, the features of your face, so that when you see a person who's often filled with anger, hatred, you don't know that person, but you look at that face and you see that the anger and hatred are sort of imprinted on the face. It's just etched into the face. And so the facial features become ugly, intimidating, even frightening. Maybe you've had experience with that kind of person. Whereas if you have a person who regularly practices and develops this loving kindness, it will change the features of the face. This is true, it's very, very true. So that the face becomes soft, gentle, peaceful, radiant, beautiful. And so people want to be beautiful. And of course there's a certain maybe genetic components that will create some people maybe having homely or ugly features, other people more beautiful features, sort of based upon the genetic code. But apart from that, there is the quality of the mind shines forth in the facial features. And so it's even mentioned in the Buddhist texts that when you develop loving kindness, your features become beautiful, radiant, and peaceful. And so that becomes a benefit in itself, something that will attract people to you. And then another thing sort of connected to the features of the face, but not only that, but it's the kind of vibration that a person sends out through their character. Maybe this sounds a little bit like a New Age way of thinking, but people, through the quality of their mind, they send out vibes, vibrations. And so even without knowing the person, without having any previous interaction with the person, just you're in a room and that person comes into the room, very often you could pick up at the psychic level sort of the vibrational frequency at which that person's mind is working. So if the person has a lot of anger or hatred, you just suddenly you pick up, you're a little bit afraid or suspicious or intimidated by that person, and then you don't want to associate with that person. And so a person who has a lot of anger or hatred probably doesn't have many friends, unless they're also rich. Then they have friends, not because the people really like them, but because people want to take advantage of them by exploiting their wealth. But on the other hand, if you have a person who's always radiated loving kindness, regularly practices this meditation of loving kindness, it changes the vibrational frequency of the mind. So when you see a person like that, you immediately feel some kind of attraction to that person. And if you develop this meditation of loving kindness, over time, you're going to find other people want to become your friends, your followers, your students, your associates, to the point sometimes you have to chase them away. And I know this from my own personal experience, like in my early days, my late teens, early 20s, I had a lot of anger. I used to explode. Little things would irritate me, and I was very explosive. I would speak rudely and angrily to others. And I found I was becoming really isolated. And then once I got into the Buddhist practice, I started taking up, slowly and gradually, I started taking up this practice of loving kindness. I found that it really significantly changed the working of my mind. So now I hardly ever get angry at all. Not completely, but very, very difficult for me to get angry. Do you think so, Bowie? She knows me very, very well. Okay, but this is an interesting question that I've had to face, because I have a very, very strong dedication to issues like social and economic justice, to peace. So the question comes up, are there any justifiable reasons for getting angry? And what I've had to do in my own thinking, clarifying my own thinking, is to make a distinction between what I would call obsessive anger and moral indignation or moral outrage. So obsessive anger, this is the emotional anger which gets control of the mind and sort of flips your mind so that you're no longer in control of yourself. This is the anger which motivates you to engage in aggressive behavior, violent behavior, angry, violent speech. And that kind of anger is counterproductive if you are throwing your efforts behind a worthy cause, demonstrating for peace, for economic justice, for climate stabilization, and you act with anger, it's going to turn people away, and you won't succeed in your undertaking. But there's something else a little bit related to anger. It has that kind of force or strength of character, but you are in control of your mind. It's not that anger is controlling you. That is moral indignation, where you find something that cuts against the grain of your convictions, something that you know is wrong, destructive, harmful, and you want to stand up for what is right, what is just, what is necessary, and you can do that forcefully, not violently, but with strength of conviction. And you could do it motivated by loving kindness and compassion. And I think the person maybe who historically maybe best represents this, at least within my lifetime, would be Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. Like if you listen to his sermons or his talks, not the beautiful I Have a Dream speech, but especially the speech that he gave at the Riverside Church, 1967, where he spoke up against the U.S. war in Vietnam. The talk was called A Time to Break Silence. It wasn't a soft, sweet, gentle speech. It was a very strong and forceful speech. He even called the United States, he said, is the greatest purveyor of violence in the world. He said today, that's 1967. And he spoke up against militarism and racism and commercialism. It's a very powerful speech, but it's coming from a mind of love and compassion. Yeah, so we make this distinction, I make this distinction between anger as an obsessive emotion that gets control of the mind, and moral indignation, which is what motivates us to stand up for social justice, economic justice, to stand up for peace, to stand up against violence. And so you could do that motivated by love, motivated by compassion, motivated by a concern for the well-being of others, to relieve the suffering of others. Okay, now in Buddhism, we have a systematic way of developing loving kindness. That is, we use meditation, or we use loving kindness as a method of meditation. And that's what I'm going to be teaching in the evening. How we develop loving kindness in a step-by-step, methodical way. And it seems, I have to say, when you read the instructions on developing the loving kindness meditation, it seems almost like a mechanical exercise, like a military exercise, or like you're getting instructions for maybe developing a software program. But that is necessary. We have to work in this methodical, systematic way in order to develop true loving kindness as a quality of the heart. And so, in the development of loving kindness, as we're going to explore it and explain it in the evening, there are two main components, what I call the two pillars in the loving kindness meditation. So one pillar consists of the recipients of loving kindness. The other pillar is the formula that we use for developing loving kindness. And so the recipients of loving kindness, we start to expand it in widening circles. And we do this, as I said, in a rather systematic way. So we have to develop the loving kindness first to those that we cherish, the people that we cherish, and then we have to expand that feeling of loving kindness until we can cherish everyone as if they were our own immediate family members. And so the way we develop loving kindness is we start off with ourself. We take ourself as the first recipient of our loving kindness. And then using the formula, the phrases, we develop that loving kindness to ourselves, and we see that at the base of our being is this fundamental urge, this drive, this need to be well, to be happy, to be safe. And then we start moving outwards. At the next level, we take a few people who are close to us. We call these the people who are dear to ourselves. So with this, you can take maybe some of your immediate family members or some very close friends, and then you'll develop the loving kindness to them, because that comes easily and naturally. And then the next level, after we can develop the loving kindness to our friends or our family members, then we take people that we know but who are a bit more distant. So we call this, for convenience, we call this the acquaintances. These can be people like your neighbors, or maybe colleagues at work, fellow students, or could be more distant relatives. And then we expand over geographical areas, widening geographical areas, until we can develop loving kindness to all human beings in this world. Then we take in the animals, and then all sentient beings. So that is the aspect of the recipients of loving kindness. And then the second pillar in the practice in developing metta is the formula that we use, which consists of several phrases. And the phrases are somewhat arbitrary, but I use some standard phrases taken from the Mett Sutta and from the commentaries. So we're going to be wishing for people first to be well, which means to be healthy of body and mind. Then we wish for them to be happy, that is, to experience inner happiness, a deep, really substantial happiness. Then we wish for people to be safe. And I think that's very important in this present day world, especially here in the United States, where people are exposed to so much violence and discrimination. So we want people to be safe from all harm and danger. And then the fourth phrase that I use is the wish for people to fulfill their good aims, for all of their good purposes in life to be fulfilled, for people to have a fulfilling and meaningful life. And so in the evening session, we're going to see how we bring these two components together. And when we move beyond ourself and the people who are dear and close to us, we're trying to develop loving kindness. It can seem difficult, but I make a distinction between artificial loving kindness and genuine loving kindness. And we have to start at the level of artificial loving kindness. That is, we are using the phrases, the formula, to try to generate that feeling of loving kindness. And at first we might not feel it, but this is where patience, persistence, and consistency in practice are necessary. Because when you practice patiently, using the formula, the phrases, at a certain point you'll find, even when working with distant people unknown to yourself, suddenly a little spark of loving kindness, a little burst of warm feeling arises towards them. And then you can start strengthening that feeling deepening it and expanding it. And in that way, you gradually learn to develop this universal, measureless, all-embracing loving kindness. Okay, so we'll be experiencing that hopefully in the evening session. So I think we'll now bring this session to an end. And then in the evening, I'll review the instructions and we can take a few simple questions and then we'll do the actual practice.
Hi, thank you, Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi. May all please rise. We pay respect to the Buddha by doing 1/2 bow. And we thank you, Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi, for his precious teaching. Please do 1/2 bow. Okay, thank you, Bante. And may we all take a break. Yeah, be back.